So in just a couple seconds, I'm going to show you some clips from very heated moments between Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican, and Senator Gary Peters, a Democrat, after Ron Johnson continues to insist that we have to look into some of the irregularities surrounding the election, even though there were no irregularities. And I'm going to play you a couple clips of Gary Peters absolutely dismantling him, and then a very, very heated moment between him and Johnson, where Johnson basically loses his mind because he doesn't like being faced with the reality that he's a peddler of disinformation.
The president and many of his supporters are, unfortunately, continuing their efforts to undermine the will of the people, disenfranchise voters, and sow the seeds of mistrust and discontent to further their partisan desire for power. Whether intended or not, this hearing gives a platform to conspiracy theories and lies, and it's a destructive exercise that has no place in the United States Senate. Joe Biden won the election more than 5 weeks ago with 306 electoral votes and received the most popular votes for a presidential candidate in American history. All 50 states and the District of Columbia have certified those results. The Electoral College met Monday, and all affirm that Joe Biden will be the president on January 20th, 2021. It's a result that the majority of the American people recognize, along with the leaders of more than 150 countries around the world. Yet even after all of that, significant numbers of Republican elected officials have been slow to publicly acknowledge that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. I appreciate that yesterday, several of my Republican colleagues made their first public comments acknowledging this fact. And I appreciate that even the chairman's rhetoric around this election has evolved over the last 24 hours. And despite the title of today's hearing, there were no widespread election irregularities that affected the final outcome. These claims are false, and giving them more oxygen is a grave threat to the future of our democracy. Now, I understand the chairman's desire to ensure our elections run smoothly, and I agree that we need to restore faith and trust in our election process. But I'm concerned that today's hearing will do more harm than good by confusing a few anecdotes about human error with the insidious claims the president has aired. Mistakes do happen in elections, but there is a difference between a clerk making an error that gets caught and corrected during routine audits and calling the entire election fraudulent or stolen when there is no evidence just because you do not like the outcome. Amplifying these obviously false narratives about fraud or irregularities corrodes public trust. It threatens national security, and it weakens our democracy and our standing around the world. Every time the president or his followers make these false claims, they destabilize our relationships with our allies and allow authoritarian adversaries to undercut American democratic leadership around the globe. Democracy and a free society are not guaranteed. We have seen democracies around the world crumble because of similar words and actions. When executives abuse their power, when political leaders work to stifle the free press, and when they delegitimize the principle of one person, one vote, it puts our country on a dangerous path towards authoritarianism.
And say that this is not disinformation, this hearing today. This is getting information we have to take a look at to restore confidence in our election integrity. We're not going to be able to just move on without bringing up these irregularities, examining them, and providing an explanation, and see where there really are problems so we can correct it moving forward. Senator Paul.
Mr. Chairman, I got to respond to that. I mean, you're saying I'm putting out
Try.
information. Well, one, it had nothing to do with this report.
You lied repeatedly.
I did not
You
offer
lied
this.
repeatedly in the press that I was spreading Russian disinformation, and that was an outright lie. And I told you to stop lying, and you continue to do it.
Mr. Chairman, this is not about airing your grievances. I don't know what rabbit hole you're running down.
You
right
talked
now.
about
love
Russian
going down rabbit
disinformation.
holes.
Senator Paul.
This is simply not what we're dealing
Senator Paul.
with. Well, Mr. Chairman, you can't make these
Judge
false
Starr.
allegations and then dropping it there. That is why this
Senator
committee
Paul.
needs to return back
Judge
to its
Starr.
Senator Paul.
partisan things. This is terrible what you're doing to this committee and all the great work that you talked about.
It is what you have done to this committee.
It is not the
falsely
case.
accusing the chairman of spreading disinformation. Nothing could have been further from the truth, and you're spouting it again, which is why I had to
This is-
respond.
oh,
Senator
come on.
Paul.
Mr. Chairman.
Judge Starr.
This is outrageous. This is outrageous.
Judge Starr, it's been alleged that 60 courts have refused to hear these cases. Therefore, there was no fraud in the election. I guess another way of looking at this is that the court cases have been refused for.
And so what you saw there very clearly was Gary Peters have enough of this whole charade. And he's 100% right to have that sort of, very frustrated tone. Because Ron Johnson before this, and I wanted to play you as little of Ron Johnson as possible because I don't want him to be allowed to spread his disinformation. But, Ron Johnson is basically saying, look, 70 million Americans, most Republicans, don't believe this contest was fully on the up and up, and that's not sustainable. And we have to have hearings like this where we hear about all these supposed issues, because if we don't, then those people are not going to think that we're being transparent, and they're not going to have trust in our system. So the Republican line, at least from some Trump hardliners like Johnson, who are seemingly willing to continue to go with the Trump train, is that we have to legitimize every kooky conspiracy theory at our hearings. Otherwise, no one's ever going to believe us again. But Gary Peters is right to say that the major reason, maybe not the only reason, but the major reason why so many dozens of millions of Americans don't believe in the result is because of people like Gary Johnson. They're the reason. People like him and Trump and OAN and Newsmax and other Republicans, even Mitch McConnell, who in his silence legitimized these crazy theories until yesterday when he finally recognized the result. The Republican Party and right-wing media and right-wing social media bubbles and ecosystems, they are the reason. There is no evidence. There's none. There's no evidence of anything, let alone anything big enough to actually change any results in any one state, let alone nationwide. Biden won by a healthy electoral college vote margin, and he won by a gargantuan popular vote margin, winning more votes than anyone in history. And you can see there, Ron Johnson has had enough of this. He tries to say, oh, you falsely accused me of Russian disinformation and blah, 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 basically trying to silence Gary Peters. But it's not really about Russia. He's trying to silence Gary Peters here because he absolutely eviscerated him. He made it clear that if there's any disinformation, if there's any lack of trust in the system, or the process, or the calculation, or whatever, it's because of people like Ron Johnson. They are the enemies of democracy. And very clearly, the Republican Party is complicit. This is not Donald Trump and his White House cronies on their own trying to contest the result while congressional Republicans recognize Biden. There are significant amounts of people in the House and in the Senate, a majority of House Republicans that have bought into this anti-democratic scheme. And anyone that sees this, and if they're a Republican, they have to be asking themselves, even if I believe in conservative values, can I be a member or a voter of a party that attacks democracy and then tries to blame others when they reject those attacks?